Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everyone. I see that a few people are still logging into the webinar today. I'm Katie Giardello with the Michigan Center for Student Success, and you all should know who I am because we've been working together on this project for a few months now. I want to thank you again for your commitment to this work, and certainly to thank our special guests from the Council of Adult and Experiential Learning, or CAEL, as some of you may better know it. We're excited to be with you this morning, and as usual, I want to make sure that the webinar platform is working for everyone. So one of my favorite things to have you do is to take a look at your control panel. And if you can, there's a little hand button up at the top where you can click to raise your hand in the attendee listing area. If you can hear me okay, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand. Hi, Michael, I can see you. It looks like you're all giving me a high five. This is very self-affirming for me, so thank you all for raising your hands and indicating that you are participating okay with us. It looks like everybody can hear me and you're following directions well, which is a really good sign for us as we get started. So thanks again. I will put your hands down because you've done what I've asked and demonstrated that you know how to interact with us today. You all are on mute just so that we don't get a lot of background noise and we can keep the presentation crisp and clear this morning. If you need to say something or you would like to ask a question, you have two little sections in your control panel, one that says questions and one that says chat. You can put your comments or questions in either one of those spaces, and that will be my primary responsibility throughout the presentation today, to go ahead and monitor your questions and your things input into the chat box. I have told our presenter that the only time I'll interrupt her is if there is a question that is germane to the moment at hand. Otherwise, we'll try to save some of that for the end. We have quite a bit of time for discussion at the end, so we discussed also if questions become complex or you would like to talk with one another, we might be able to facilitate an open dialogue session where I would unmute everyone, but we'll make that decision as we cross that bridge and come together with that. I'm going to go ahead and just talk through a couple of quick introductory items, and then we will get on with the show. So if we can move the slide deck forward. Let's see if that'll work.
I'm sorry, Katie. I don't know why it's not moving for me.
That's okay.
And yet it did before.
Okay, well,
there we go.
There we go. We'll just have a little delay. I almost broke down altogether earlier today on a video conference call, and no one could hear me. I was supposed to be advancing slides, and it wasn't happening. And so I understand that and appreciate that there can be sometimes those technical glitches. But it looks like we're where we need to be. For those of you who have been involved with this project since the beginning, this slide should be familiar, and it explains what our goal is in our METC Degree Bridge Partners Project, which is simply to support your institutions in creating at least one new degree bridge pathway for veterans in healthcare areas. So I'm not going to belabor this because you've all signed on to the project with pretty clear awareness of what we're asking for you. So we'll move forward and wait a little while until the slide deck catches up, and then I can give you one more quick review. Again, this should be familiar to those of you in our program, in the project, since the beginning, in that we are in kind of this second part of the work where the technical assistance is being provided, and CAEL is one of the best providers of technical assistance around prior learning assessment, so we're very pleased to have them with us this morning. And I believe most of you should have received an email from me last week with a toolkit that CAEL worked collaboratively with the METC campus to develop, and it's all about crosswalking curriculum, which is exactly what we're doing in this project. So this is just a reminder of what you've signed on to. You will join us again for 2 additional webinars, and then you all have already begun the work on your campuses to do this articulation with your faculty and staff members in the departments, with that deadline of February 1st to submit the materials to METC. One quick thing I want to draw your attention to is that final box there. We would like to pay you for this work. In order to do that, we need to have a legal contract signed. We are calling that an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. Again, at the beginning of the project, I sent this out to all of you with the request that you cycle it through your campus contract process so that we can get things moving. So far, we have executed 2 of those MOUs. So I am still waiting for the additional 8 institutions to forward your partially signed MOU to me so that we can facilitate final execution. That is what is predicating the stipend. We need to have that fully executed before the end of the project. So in the beginning, I said there's no rush, and I'll say that again today, but I will also say that I know sometimes these contractual things take a fair amount of time on the campus to cycle through. So please be aware that we have to have the fully executed MOU intact in order to facilitate the stipend at the end of the project. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to contact me directly and I can work with you on it. Okay, let's move forward, and I'm going to invite Dr. Erica Oriens, who is the Executive Director of the Michigan Center for Student Success, to say a few things as we get started and get ready to turn this over to CAEL. And I will say, because I didn't say it in the beginning, that we are recording today. I think all of you are aware of that as well. So I will make the link to the recorded version available for everyone to share with your campus teams as we move forward. Thank you. Erica.
Great, thanks, Katie. Thanks for putting all of this together and for all of you who have joined the webinar. As you know, we have institutions from all across Michigan involved in this project. And I will say, as part of our work in the Center for Student Success, I'm so excited to see this type of work continuing. Your ongoing commitment to student success is extremely impressive, and your particular commitment to veterans and military-connected students. And I think tying this all together so that those military-connected students can earn degrees is just a critically important part of our work at the Center for Student Success. I'd also like to thank the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, who's funding this work through a grant that they received from the Lumina Foundation. And they were really impressed with the work that we've done over the last 3 years around this topic, and in collaboration with all of you. And so we're delighted that they were able to provide us some funding that the vast majority of which we could pass along to you. And I'm also very excited to introduce Amy Morris from CAEL. We have partnered with CAEL over the years on several projects, but we're excited to do this because this is exactly where CAEL is, where CAEL does great work around this idea of PLA and awarding academic credit, alternative credit more generally. So with that said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amy Morris. Amy?
Good morning. Let's see. All right. Yeah, Katie and Erica, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for attending and having me here today. It really is a privilege to talk to you all. And thank you very much. I echo Erica's comments for taking up the challenge to advance the cause of higher education, especially regarding student veterans, and helping them to earn advanced degrees and advanced credentials more expeditiously by recognizing the military prior learning that takes place in their education and training. So thank you so much for endeavoring down that path. As I mentioned before, we're here today to talk about a toolkit that CAEL worked with METC to create that really comes alongside of institutions, faculty, and academic professionals interested in first understanding the viability of moving forward with a potential bridge, crosswalk, or gap programming in healthcare. And then once they determine that viability, moving forward in next steps in the implementation process and what it means to crosswalk that curriculum, what that curriculum looks like. So with support from the Michael Reese Health Trust in Chicago, we were able to gather folks and faculty from all over the United States to help put this toolkit together. And so our hope is that it greatly assists you in the good work that you're currently doing. As Erica mentioned, my name is Amy Morris, and I work with CAEL. As you can see in the picture there, I am a member, an enlisted member of the United States Air Force and the Air National Guard. I have been for 16 years. And if you notice in the bottom left-hand corner, yes, that is a clarinet I'm holding. That's me using the undergraduate degree my folks paid for. I was a music education major and wanted to serve my country playing, and so for 16 years I have been an Air Force bandsman. In about 2003, the Department of Defense realized that music communicates and builds bridges across cultures, and so we became a deployable resource, and I'm proud to have deployed twice in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and a veteran myself. But that's my part-time job in the Air National Guard. Full-time, over the last about 15 years, I have been a university division director, faculty member, academic professional, always working with adult non-traditional learners, international populations, and student veteran populations, as well as being a PLA practitioner. For about a year, I served CAEL as their manager of veterans education and career initiatives, and resigned my work full-time with CAEL so that I could finish up that darn dissertation. And so I defended about a month ago, and I'm glad that that chapter or those chapters are over. But I continue my work with CAEL on a consulting basis, going across the nation, working with faculty, universities, and systems to increase their capacity to assess prior learning, specifically military prior learning for academic credit. So I'm very, very glad to be here with you today. A little bit about CAEL, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. If you're not familiar, we are a nonprofit organization based out of Chicago, Illinois, in the Loop, where our vision and the advocacy that we have traversed across the nation for the last 40 years is that adults should have meaningful learning, credentials, and work. And so we traverse several different spaces. Certainly we do great work with colleges and universities like yourself, but we also work in public policy, work with government and philanthropic entities and labor unions, again, to make sure that every adult has the opportunity for meaningful learning and the opportunity to earn credentials. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. Well, we're going to talk about this toolkit and the different components of it and how you might be able to use it as you craft your crosswalk or bridge program. We'll talk about, like I said, how to use it and then what that project implementation might look like for you. And I do understand that your institutions are at very different places in the process. So if you're past some of the parts that we'll talk about in the very beginning, that's great. Tune in, tune out. But then the second half, we are going to talk about crosswalk examples and kind of what to expect when you look at program of instruction materials and curriculum plan materials from METC. And then, like Katie said, we'll have plenty of time at the end for some questions and discussion. So the purpose of the toolkit really is to help guide and assist institutions in their efforts to expand the recognition of military learning, and it is healthcare specific. While you'll find other publications from CAEL and research and papers regarding military prior learning assessment, this toolkit specifically addresses the healthcare discipline. We hope that it's a companion piece for faculty and administrators, but really it's a second step for those who have already visited METC and understand the good work that goes on down there and how the training and education facility functions. And so once you've done that tour, is the tour required to make the toolkit useful? Certainly not, but it certainly is a companion to those who have already visited METC. It provides those next steps in the implementation process, as you already know how to initiate a bridge partnership with METC, and then articulating that prior learning for academic credit. You'll find, if you haven't had the opportunity to review the toolkit yet, that's okay. We're going to do a good overview today, but you'll find that it has two main components. The first is an expository piece that really talks about the factors that an institution and faculty and administration should consider when developing a bridge program. If you don't have the opportunity to visit METC, Section 1 does provide a great introduction to the training and education that happens at that facility down at Fort Sam Houston, right outside of San Antonio. It also gives information on METC curriculum and accessing their academic catalog, which is strikingly similar to the academic catalogs you find at your institution. It talks about the methods of military training and how the Department of Defense documents the education and training that our service members go through when they go to be in any healthcare or a medical capacity in their service. That training and recognition is often documented on DD-214s. That's the document that every service member receives upon discharge from the service. And the key critical component that you find in that 214 is it details the career field that the service member was in. So you might see that 68 whiskey or 68W designation that might tell you that that person was a military medic. The second document that you would use for evaluation, we talk about the Joint Services transcript and the Community College of the Air Force transcripts and the components that you find on those, as well as how to use the ACE, American Council on Education Military Guide to supplement the work as you crosswalk the METC curriculum to your own. There are some pieces in there in determining market viability for institution, regulatory considerations that are very specific to healthcare disciplines, and then implementation steps. The second part of the toolkit really digs into familiarization of the program of instruction and curriculum plan materials that you can get from METC and what the matching process will look like. And we'll get into more of that in just a little bit. I want to highlight just a couple things that I think are important for the faculty and those that are going to be doing the crosswalking and maybe that evaluating regarding this expository first section. The academic catalog and accrediting bodies are a great resource. If you haven't had a chance to review those, visit the METC website as faculty take a look at how to crosswalk that curriculum. A lot of answers or at least some validation, let's say some validation at the very beginning can be obtained by saying, oh gosh, METC's curriculum and these programs of instruction are accredited by the same bodies that accredit our institutional programs. So you have that consistency there at the very beginning. So it's a good place to start. And then also you'll find contact information for questions regarding what you find in those program and instruction materials. And so as you traverse that curriculum, certainly if there are questions that you have about maybe gaps, or did the students do this part of the clinical, or can you tell me more about this equipment that they were trained on, certainly feel free to contact METC. They're a wonderful resource and they'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Also, as we take a look at the a toolkit like this, it's easy to overlook the appendices, those things in the back. By the time you get to the end, you kind of are finished and oftentimes are reluctant to take a look at appendices. So sample crosswalk evaluation forms can be found. Don't reinvent the wheel. We've kind of crafted a generalizable one. So if you're not at that point in your process yet, maybe take a look at that and see if it's adaptable for you. Take a look at the crosswalk examples. We'll go over just a few today, but there are many, many more contained in there. And then a glossary of relevant military terms that might aid you in this process, but also help in just serving student veterans in general and some of that vernacular that goes along with being in the military that that doesn't always translate to the civilian sector or into academia very well. So that glossary might be helpful. So as you consider beginning that curriculum design process, there are a couple steps that we believe are just the first steps and best practices in approaching the degree bridge building process. Certainly take a look in the program catalog and find the programs that you believe might be the most viable for doing a crosswalk, and then contact METC and ask for their complete program of instruction or curriculum plan materials for those programs. Once you get that material in hand, then conduct a side-by-side comparison of the METC curriculum along with your syllabi and program goals and objectives. We always ask or advise to consider those American Council on Education recommendations. Certainly, as part of the assessment process, they're a very valuable tool in understanding what the courses address, some of those outcomes. And then lower division and upper division credit recommendations. So they are a great place to start and provide good foundation as you do more specific crosswalking of that material. And then we say, don't reinvent the wheel. Other institutions across the nation, and there are some spotlighted in the toolkit as well, have done this bridge programming and worked with METC, and so certainly seek those out. And Katie, I will send you so that you can distribute to your faculty. CAEL has a publication where we talk about all of these different bridge programs, specifically in healthcare. It's a couple years old, but I think it's still really good and relevant. So I'll make sure I send that to you when we're done here today, so you can distribute that and the faculty can take a look at other programs and see if there is any alignment as you move forward.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Sure thing. And then once we've done that, you know, determine if there are sufficient METC learning outcomes aligned with your programs. And if there are there enough to save students time and money? And really that's program specific. And so then if so, is a crosswalk, bridge, or gap programming the most appropriate? And then depending on that answer, what does that gap or bridge programming look like? And so those are kind of, you know, the steps in determining what the best approach is and process to put in place. And that is very institution and very program specific. So let's take a look at these curriculum examples. So this is starting then on the second half of the guide. We're going to spend probably the bulk of our time taking a look at the different parts of the POI, program of instruction. I'll just refer to them as POI and curriculum plan CP materials going forward. And it provides the technical examples really on how to use the materials to assess the learning objectives and align them with your institution's courses. So program of instruction materials are different from curriculum plan materials, but essentially contain the same information. Some of them are done by programs, so some programs are only POI, some programs are only CP, and some of those are very branch specific. So perhaps the program is only a Navy program, and so it will only have a CP plan. While an Army program that might be just Army is POI, and then some of these that we'll see, Navy Corpsman, 68 Whiskey, Army Medic, are the same program and they span both branches. And so, like I said, while they are different materials and depending on the program, you may receive POI or CP materials from METC. They contain the same essential information. So METC's curriculum is really quite versatile when trying to determine if learning outcomes match by providing various formats such as narratives, like we see here in this slide, equipment lists, clinical task charts, and those are all different tools that you can use to do a side-by-side comparison of corresponding course learning outcomes and competencies for your program. So when a faculty member begins matching his or her institution's learning objectives and outcomes with METC, often they'll need to review several different METC lessons within the same program to determine if there is a suitable match. So sometimes when we have one course that has maybe 5 or 6 learning outcomes, maybe more, to find one specific lesson or one specific course within a METC curriculum and program of instruction material, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we need to look across courses or across lessons to compile those learning outcomes to meet what we might find in one of our academic courses. So you can see on this slide that one of the sample courses learning outcomes is matched in one lesson of METC's curriculum. However, like I said before, sometimes an outcome match is satisfied by matching several of METC's lessons. And like I said, we'll take a look at more of these examples as we go on in the presentation. Here's another just example, and you can see on page 19 of the toolkit for reference if you take a look at this later. The narrative, this narrative that we see here actually provides information regarding chapter level objectives and outcomes that are contained within the framework of a much larger learning module. So you can see the lesson title at the top addresses the entire learning module, module 4, and then you can take a look at the different chapters, which are 16 through 24. Also of note, you can see that they are teaching from the Emergency Care 13th edition. And I meant to be transparent about this before we started, I apologize, but I work with faculty across the country on prior learning assessment and military prior learning assessment, but I am not a healthcare discipline expert. All of my academic foundation is out of the business discipline. So I have visited METC and I worked on this toolkit, especially on the expository piece, but I won't pretend to be a healthcare expert or from this discipline, so forgive me for that. But as you can see here, they do outline the text that they use. Emergency Care 13th edition. You might find alignment in the texts that METC uses and what you use for your curriculum. This slide provides, or in the top reference, it highlights the METC training lists and individual clinical tasks that a student might take or have to perform in order to pass. So you're able to determine if those tasks, clinical tasks, match your curriculum, your requirements, or your state's licensure requirements. Like I said, this is just a small example extracted from a lesson, and you can reference more about that on page 19 of the toolkit. The bottom block references the specific equipment that METC uses. If you have the opportunity to visit METC, you'll quickly see that the equipment that they use is really quite state-of-the-art and up to date. And so you'll be able to also see, like I said here, the equipment that METC uses to train. National stock numbers are utilized when appropriate. And page 20 and 22 of the toolkit will help you take a look at other lists so that you can reference those as you go. Another example, so we see here course objectives and learning, levels of learning that are outlined again as part of that program of instruction material. If we take a look, this is just an example syllabus that we were able to retrieve from an institution for Surge 102, Surgical Supplies and Equipment. And you can see that the institution's course description, forgive me for reading to you, this course will provide an overview of surgical equipment and supplies to include minimally invasive surgery. The function, assembly, use, and care of equipment in the surgical environment is addressed. And if we take a look at the learning objective number 1.2.1, general surgery, we can see that those lesson objectives addressed part, if not, and again, I'll leave this to the subject matter experts all, of the objectives, general objectives for their Surge 102 course. So again, if we take all of these slides and a couple more that we're going to see, all of these materials are available and these descriptions are available, which while you may have to go to different places to retrieve them within the lessons, there is quite exhaustive and comprehensive documentation of the learning that does take place at METC. This next slide gives an example of the instructional formats, methodologies, and time frames of learning. You can see that, for example, in this particular block, the number of didactic hours, number of lab and practice hours contained in a course. All of this information then can be synergized in their application to your course and program requirements, objectives, and outcomes. And again, more examples than this are contained in the toolkit itself. This is just a broad overview. So let's take a look at just a basic EMT 101 student learning outcome. You can see that this outcome, again, just a sample from a syllabus we retrieved from another institution. The overarching outcome is to list the pathophysiology, signs and symptoms, and management of the following medical or trauma conditions. And let's focus on the second one. The next 4 slides will examine different pieces of the program of instruction materials that were used and that came together and were synergized to address this second learning outcome. So let's take a look at this first one. We can see that in the highlighted section, and I apologize if it's too small to read, but at the top corner you can see that on page 19 of METC's curriculum, this is where we found that this one outcome, or one part of the outcome, was addressed. In chapter 25, it provides an overview of the signs, symptoms, and common causes of hypoperfusion, the progression of compensated and decompensated shock, cardiovascular and non-cardiovascular shock, and prevention of shock. And if we dial back to that second learning outcome there, we can see in the overarching one in A that some of those pieces were addressed in that particular chapter of the lesson. Let's take a look at another example that addresses that same outcome. You can see in the red highlighted portion that students will identify the signs and symptoms unique to each phase of, you can tell I'm not healthcare, hypovolemic shock, and the appropriate field management are addressed. And so we had to look all the way to page 36 of the METC curriculum to find that one objective or outcome that dials back again to this time more the second or the sub outcome of the overarching one. Another instance here, flip a couple more pages and we see that on page 39 of the military medic curriculum, the lesson covers the different types of shock: hypoperfusion, anaphylactic, septic, neurogenic, and cardiogenic. And again, all of those specifically were highlighted in the second objective or outcome of the example. So you can see we had to look in different places and found in the narrative with some clinicals in this piece supporting the different outcomes and how to kind of look through the materials and what you might find as you attempt to match your learning outcomes with METCs. So the next couple slides, I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to take a look at how we have matched the course outcomes, which you'll find on the left. Again, this is just an example, outcomes from school surgical tech curriculum that we retrieved from a university, I believe down in Houston, with the surgical specialties. This is actually Army and Navy curriculum. Both branches are training, both branches would take this Surge 106 course. And so if you follow the red lines, for example, because it's just easiest on the eyes, let's take outcome number 7 on the left, discuss priorities in emergency procedures for trauma surgery. And we go directly across to 1.11.1, trauma and emergency surgery. You'll see the objectives contained there, and you'll be able to determine whether those lesson objectives align with your objectives and outcomes. And then those lesson objectives, you will also find other information and more descriptive narrative for in the program of instruction materials. Okay, so I'll let you just take 1 minute to kind of draw the correlations and take a look at what we've done here in a very broad general way. Okay, and sticking with the same school objectives and some other objectives, this is, oh, let me get back down here and advance. This is a separate course, same school objectives, but a separate course. Again, the same curriculum, the same program that Army and Navy are involved in, but this is Bio 101 A&P. So the outcomes that were not satisfied with the Surge Tech curriculum that we found on the last slide were satisfied through this course, or at least the first objective, and yes, and the last were satisfied with this course. So you can see that 2 or 3 METC courses in this example, when you can see Surge 102 down at the bottom, met 8 of the 11 learning objectives listed in the school's curriculum. And it's just another example of a time when a school would then need to determine what to do when the METC curriculum doesn't perfectly match or align with your learning objectives. And that's a discussion certainly that is unique to the institution, unique to the program and the faculty. And like I said before, sometimes it means gap programming bridge programming. And for those that aren't quite familiar with the difference, and there's not always a common vernacular across higher education when it comes to the definition of crosswalk, bridge, and gap programming, so I'll give you CAELs. But crosswalking is the process, what we're doing here, of matching and aligning course objectives and outcomes. Building a bridge program might be where you say, okay, we understand that military medics have met these, for example, 3, 4, 5 courses in our curriculum, but they're lacking the last 3, 4, 5 courses in the curriculum. So we will put together a program that is just for veterans that will fill in that gap. This is all that they need to do. They are the only ones typically qualified to take this program. They take the bridge program and they graduate with the credential. Gap programming is where the curriculum or the school comes alongside and says, we really have these very specific gaps, and that's where you tend to see quote unquote boot camp programs where the medics will come in and fulfill some of those pieces that are part of the civilian curriculum that they don't know or don't quite yet understand, that brings them up to speed to enter the university's curriculum. I spoke with one institution not that long ago that articulated that one challenge that they were able to overcome was the fact that triage methods that are taught in the military and that are to be used on the battlefield certainly aren't the same triage methods that we see in emergency medicine here in the continental US and for civilian purposes. So they were able to put together a week-long boot camp that brought those students up to speed on some of those pieces before they entered the school's program. So that would kind of be a better example of gap programming as opposed to bridge programming. And I can certainly try to answer some questions later if there's confusion surrounding some of that. And again, there is really not a common vernacular between gap, bridge, and sometimes crosswalking among higher education. So once we do this articulation and you've decided what's best for your institution, the last half is really marketing the program. How do we get the word out to those folks that are separating from the military? How do we create a community awareness that this is a program that honors veterans and wants to enroll them and help them earn those advanced credentials? So as you near the second phase and the implementation phase of your project, maybe consider some of these questions. How does the service member in preparation for separation from the service learn about the education and career options that your institution is offering? What does your pipeline look like? Do you have bases near you that might feed into your program, and how do we get the word out that way? Are there organizations that veterans in your area look to for news and support? Certainly, there are lots of veterans organizations that have been around for an awful long time, the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars type clubs, and so those are great places to look as well. Don't forget, we have a lot of folks who have separated maybe in 5 or 10 years that are part of those organizations that are not necessarily newly separated, but could absolutely benefit from a program like that, like yours. Websites and social media, what specific ones are of value to veterans in your community? Are there periodicals in circulation that are most often received? So those are just some of the maybe questions to consider about making veterans aware of the program and what you're offering. We always encourage departments to certainly engage your marketing and communications teams. Craft a logo, help them to get key messaging points out for you about your program. Think about what collateral you may need, physical brochures and different things that can be distributed to these other organizations or on base, creating awareness. And is it appropriate to have a web page? And what does some of undertaking some of the communications and marketing piece look like? And certainly we always encourage to make it as transparent and accessible as possible. A lot of times, institutions will address prior learning on a page that says prior learning assessment. And students who are looking, potential students who are looking for programs, healthcare or otherwise, often don't know what prior learning assessment means. They don't know that that's earning college credit for the prior learning and experience that they have. And so use language and vernacular that speaks to a potential student, and then certainly identify at the admissions matriculation point a single accessible point of contact for student veterans. That's just good best practice in serving student veterans in general, but intentional branding for your program is very important. More on getting the word out, and this is, you know, a lot of institutions do an excellent job of all of this to begin with, but we like to remind career and education fairs. There are a lot of veterans career fairs and getting veterans into the workforce and helping them translate their military prior learning and experience into the civilian sector. So taking part in those career and education fairs can be a great way to get the word out. Facebook ads, military magazines, GI Jobs, some of the other publications, Military Times magazines might be of interest to you in getting the word out. Employers in the field, what employers around you might be able, as we look at that pipeline from education into the career field, to partner to help facilitate students through the credential and into a meaningful career path. And then if you're located near a military installation, that installation should have an education advisor. Sometimes that is an enlisted person, an officer, but sometimes it's a civilian contractor. And so certainly meet with an education advisor. In the time that I worked with the university down in the St. Louis area, we were able to articulate memorandums of understanding where we were able to hold classes on Scott Air Force Base and offer courses to the folks that were there through a memorandum of understanding. So we did that through the education advisor. So definitely seek that out if that's an avenue that sounds viable for your program. And then every base has a newsletter, if not a newspaper. So if advertising through that venue is usually very good too. And those newspapers, I find, in my experience, are very much read and accessed by the service members on base. So just some tips and suggestions for helping to get the word out about the excellent work that your institution has done on behalf of student veterans. And that takes us to the end of our time with the presentation, at least. And I thank you very, very much. And I look forward to hopefully a good discussion and answering any questions that you might have at this time.
Thank you, Amy. That was really helpful.
Great. Thank you, Katie.
And hopefully you all, if you didn't have a chance to dive into that toolkit when it was sent to you last week, hopefully now with the additional context that you've heard from Amy, you'll be able to do that and it will be helpful to your team. So far, no questions. And so I always like to say this is the long drawn out dance where I give you all time to type your questions in. But it's also possible that the webinar was very clear and that just stepping through the toolkit to know what was available to you and what the resource entails is what folks needed or wanted this morning. But again, I'm gonna kind of hang out for a minute and let people type if they have questions. And certainly if anybody wants me to unmute, you can let me know that as well, and I can just unmute you if you'd rather not type your questions. All right, the long pregnant pause there, just making sure that we're getting in touch with folks. So I don't know, Amy, if you're willing to take questions after the fact, but I know we also discussed that probably the questions that you all will be coming up with are most appropriate to asking of the METC campus, because that is clearly the curriculum that you're looking to articulate your academic programs with. And if you haven't yet, I'm going to remind you all again, because I did get a question about this as to where you receive the curriculum. You will receive the curriculum directly from METC. And I have just typed in, although it looks like it pasted kind of weird, but I just typed into the chat box the email address for Keith, who the email starts with Reginald, which is his full name, but he goes by Keith. Keith is who you should contact at METC in order to get your curriculum plans of interest. If you have not done that yet, I would suggest that you do that soon. That is the crux of this work, is reviewing the curriculum in the way that Amy has described for you, and the toolkit further delineates so that you can make the articulation and create these degree bridge pathways as part of this project. So again, I would encourage you to contact Keith. He is exceptionally positive and very responsive in my experience. So I'd encourage you to do that. It does look like we have a question that came in. Super. So let me pull this out and see what I can come up with there. Okay. Okay, so the question is probably for me. It says, for the February deadline, to which point do we need to get as far as the development of our bridge, the bridge program? So that's a good question. And essentially, METC in December, in early December, I believe it is the 10th, we have a webinar planned where METC will outline all of the materials that you will need to submit to them in order to be eligible or be applying for, I guess, or looking for approval to be a new degree bridge partner. What I have heard from other campuses who have done this work is that there are curriculum materials that come into the submission. So I know when Kirtland Community College had developed their surgical technology degree bridge, they simply had to make a list of courses that were still required. And in that case, the Surg Tech program was programmatically accredited, so they were able to use the certificate that was earned by the service member to articulate into most of the didactic healthcare specific curriculum. And then the bookend to that was a gen ed package that Kirtland was able to produce fully online. Now that is not required for the rest of the campuses or for all of the degree programs, but in this case, that was Kirtland's decision to make that an online sort of completion program to make those students eligible to receive an associate degree. So what I'm understanding is that you'll be producing documents like that show pretty clearly how the courses or how the METC curriculum articulates to yours and then what is left for the student to complete the degree. At one point, I had shared some degree maps from a few institutions, and I know the Purdue Global Campus had shared some of their degree maps as well when we did that webinar several weeks ago. And so I might encourage you to take a look at those items because I think artifacts like that is what you will be looking for at the end of the project. So I will say again, we are not, I expect, and what I've heard from others again who have gone through the process is that you submit materials to METC, there's a little bit of back and forth, there might be clarifying questions, and their faculty in the program areas are the ones that actually approve your degree bridge program applications or requests. So once the faculty have sufficient detail and in that engagement and dialogue, you'll have the full approval. We are not looking for the full approval by February 1st. We simply need you to have submitted whatever initial documents are needed to begin the process of review and approval at METC. So it may take several months afterwards for that to become fully approved, and that's okay. You'll receive your stipend from us in this project as long as you've submitted the initial materials by February the 1st. So hopefully that answers the question. But please, if you have other questions, go ahead and type. It looks like maybe we have another one as well. Oh, no, we don't. That was the only one. Any other questions for me or for Amy? Okay, well, one of the best things that I get to do sometimes is to give you some of your day back. So you will have a little chunk of time where you are off the radar. And I always say you could go get your ice cream now, get another cup of coffee, because your calendar says you're busy. But I'll thank you again for your commitment to this work. Please feel free to follow up with me at any point, and I will be sending the recording over just as soon as I get it converted. Amy, let me thank you again for your presence today and your expertise on this topic, and of course for your service to the country as well.
Katie, thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you to everyone for the good work you do. It's really, I love it personally and professionally, the dedication to advancing student veterans through higher education and propelling them into their intended career field. So thank you for all of your work very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
You as well.